Morning, everyone. Lawrence Nicholas here from Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to introduce our moderator for today, Eileen Cahill. She is the chair of the Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors Equal Opportunity Committee, and she is going to introduce our guest speaker. All you, Eileen.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking an hour or so out of your time to learn so much about this important topic. Our guest speaker today is Bill Dedman. Bill Dedman is a Pulitzer Peabody Award-winning investigative reporter, best-selling author, and keynote speaker. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, HUD, and banking and real estate associations. Bill received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for The Color of Money, his series on racial discrimination by banks and savings and loan associations in middle-income Black neighborhoods. The Color of Money led to expanded federal laws on disclosure of loan data, new financing for middle-income homebuyers, and a greater awareness of systemic discrimination. The articles in The Color of Money are online and available at powerreporting.com, and that will be made available to you to take a look at the end of the day. 30 years later, Bill was one of the 4 leading reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation for racial steering by real estate agents, Long Island Divided. The investigation, published in November 2019, revealed that Long Island's dominant residential real estate brokers helped to reinforce racial segregation through illegal steering of customers. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divided and its 40-minute documentary film, Testing the Divide, is also available in full online at newsday.com/divided. Thank you again, Bill, for coming today to our group. I'm going to let you now take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Lauren. Everyone, it's good to be with you this morning. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. It may be surprising to you. It certainly was surprising to me that NAR and so many real estate associations around the country have responded positively to a newspaper's investigation. It seems that our team's tests on fair housing have sparked an important conversation and also action with industry leaders saying these are practices that must change, and soon. I'll give you a couple of examples. When the head of Realgy, the CEO of America's largest real estate company, which, as you know, owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and Sotheby's International and other brands, when that CEO says we should be testing our own agents and brokers for steering and unequal treatment of customers, and something has changed. When several realtor associations at the state level and some large city associations have begun to organize programs to test their own members for unequal treatment of customers, then change is happening quickly. And when NAR has embraced this idea of self-testing of agents and says, we'll help make that happen, more change is coming. The thinking seems to be, if we don't get ahead of this, policing ourselves, we'll keep having these kinds of embarrassing investigations, damaging our brand. We'll have more government regulation. Besides, there's the recognition that it's the right thing to fix this, and that fair housing is the law, not just in April. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, giving you something to think about. How can unequal treatment creep into our day-to-day work despite our best intentions. We can dive right into looking together at some clips of our Newsday video of real estate agents in action, admittedly, perhaps not on their best days. And we'll focus on best practices, steps that brokerages and agents can take to treat everyone fairly. As we go, I urge you to keep a list. Jot down specific steps that you think you and your brokerage might take. And then we'll compare lists at the end. We'll also talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what agents can say about schools. I know that all of you want to make sure that every customer who calls or emails or walks into your office is treated fairly.
Okay, thank you, Bill. You won the Pulitzer Prize, for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I also thought it might be interesting for our viewers to hear a brief summary of that investigation. And how does that investigation compare with this one?
I think there are a couple of lessons to be learned. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. You can read it online. These stories were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders, particularly banks, doing business on one part of the map, but not another. Or rather, the banks in Atlanta were collecting deposits on all parts of the map, but making loans only in some areas. This was back in the late 1980s. And redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and elsewhere making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not at all in Black areas, even Atlanta's higher income areas that were home to Coretta Scott King, the mayor, the executives from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. A couple of connections to today. First, the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. But we looked at how the banks operated. We found, for example, differences in where branches had been open and closed, differences in which real estate agents the banks marketed their services to, even which branches would accept a loan application. And I'd like to mention a project later for the Boston Globe in the 2000s, looking at racial profiling in traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap, and you can read it online. It's not about who gets stopped, it's about what happens after the stop. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we all deserve the ticket. We're all pre-qualified for the speeding ticket. But some people get a break that others don't get. And it's like being a bank customer or a real estate customer. You have no way to know if you're being treated equally. If you get a warning, did everyone else going that speed get a warning? You would have no basis for a complaint. What we found was that in Massachusetts, when we looked at every traffic ticket and warning in the state, it's pretty easy to predict who gets a ticket and who gets a warning if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women were much more likely to get a warning, especially younger women. I talked with a college student. She had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. Does it surprise you that that break for women runs out at about age 40? It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. Minorities more often got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men, for going the same speed. Again, the customers, call them customers, wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. The customers in Long Island Divided in our tests of real estate in New York had no idea whether they were being treated better or worse than someone else. Now, take together these three very different stories: redlining, traffic tickets and warnings, and steering in real estate. What are the lessons? First, the absence of complaints tells you nothing about whether your office is obeying the law. We all understand that it's not a fix to say, well, we respond forcefully to all complaints, or we've never had any complaints. No one knows what listings are given to another customer. Second, diversity efforts alone will not solve this problem. Diversity in hiring and promotion and retention of staff is useful in many ways in your business and ours, but it's not a cure-all. People often ask, well, were the minority real estate agents also discriminating? Yes, and that's just as illegal. We found real estate agents of all races and backgrounds steering customers, just as we found white and black and Asian police officers treating minorities different from whites. We should no longer be surprised about this. Everyone has biases. A lot of us have an old-fashioned notion that discrimination is something that a person in one group intentionally does out of some spite or bias or prejudice against people in another group. But we all realize now that it doesn't have to be intentional. And treating people differently is illegal under the fair housing laws, whether you're in their group or not in their group. Third, small actions, small policies can have a huge impact in creating and perpetuating a segregated system. It seemed clear, for example, that the realtors in our tests didn't have rigorous standards for what they do and don't do with every new customer. No checklist. For example, we saw customers come back with thick folders of information, others with skinny folders from the same agent. That seems like something you can fix. Do agents have consistent ways of qualifying customers? Do you ask credit scores and income of every buyer? That's legal. Or of no one? That's legal. Do you require pre-approval from every buyer? That's okay. You don't want to waste your time. Or do you require pre-approval from no one? That's okay. You'll help train them to refer them, get them help, get them pre-approved. That's okay. It's in between. If you have a policy, but some people get a break that others don't get, some get the warning and some get the ticket, that's where you end up on YouTube. Here's just such an example. I'd like to show you an introductory part of our documentary film. The project's called Long Island Divided. We call the film, which is about 40 minutes, Testing the Divide. I'm going to show you a few minutes of that film today. In this clip, one customer receives service from an agent, while the same agent refuses to help another customer in the same circumstance. Let me start that video for you. Just takes a second. Here we go. It's coming around on the guitar.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything you want to do unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, we shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I asked. My husband's working with somebody in a bank.
We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approval.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification list. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Bill, can you tell us why did Newsday start this investigation in the beginning?
Yes. Why is the newspaper going around testing real estate agents on Long Island?
There you go.
Let me set the scene a little bit. Many of you may know Long Island, stretching east of New York City, more than 100 miles, a suburban area, 2 counties, with almost 3 million people. And Long Island has a lot of diversity overall, with people from all races and nationalities and religions and backgrounds. But minority groups, particularly Black homeowners, are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Is that by choice? We had long heard from Black homebuyers encountering problems trying to buy a home outside of those few areas. So we followed the methods used by fair housing agencies, sending out testers, with the addition of hidden cameras to record video and audio. That's legal in New York. It's legal in most states. It's legal in New Jersey. Most state laws say recording is legal if one person in the conversation knows that it's being taped, and that one person can be the home buyer, the tester. Hidden cameras are not legal in a dozen states, Maryland, for example. In those states, everyone has to know they're being recorded. But don't think you're off the hook even there. We can still do testing. We can interview the testers. We can have them write down what happened. We can debrief them. We can monitor the texts and emails between the buyer and the agent. And most of all, we can see the listings that the testers get from the agents. The main reason we did testing is that it's the only way to see reliably what is happening, to get beyond anecdote and to do a study. Our testers often came back from the real estate office telling us, that agent was so nice. She was so helpful. They only learned the truth, whether they were treated better or worse, when our team brought the buyers together to watch videos and to see the maps of the listings they were given. Here's a video clip where you'll meet some of our testers and also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them and was an advisor on our project. And then you'll meet an agent, one agent, a second generation realtor who has a different plan for different customers. Let me start that video for you. It just takes a second. Here we go. Ready?
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like,
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, crime, resale.
That agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different plan for home buyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off the Southern State Parkway until you get past these neighborhoods. That was one of the patterns that startled us when some agents began their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers they just met, with inappropriate comments or guidance that violates the fair housing laws. It seemed to be the sales pitch, the standard guidance to some buyers for how to narrow your home search. I hate to say it, but for these agents, it seemed that steering was the service they were selling.
Bill, would you please give us a summary of the tests? Who was tested and what was the outcome?
Yes, Eileen, here's how we went about it and how it broke down. Our Newsday team focused on home sales. In this test, we didn't look at rentals. Testing is commonly done of rental properties. We sent a white home buyer and then a minority home buyer. We randomly chose which tester would see the agent first, Asian then white, or white then black, or Hispanic then white. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and age. We dressed them in the same business casual style, similar shirts for the men. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women to carry so there wouldn't be a class difference. They asked for the same geographic area, the same price range, and the same number of bedrooms. They had the same number of children in the public schools, and they were prepared to give the same income and credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than their mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, on which they were the same. None of them were pre-approved. We shop for houses at different price ranges. Now, always the same price for the two testers who were paired up together, but we did tests at different levels. On Long Island, entry level at that point was about $400,000. So we started there. And then we went up and did tests all the way up to a higher end, $7 million. $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house out in the Hamptons on Long Island, but it will get you into his neighborhood. Of course, then you'd have Alec Baldwin for a neighbor, and that might not go well. Now, how did we pick the agents? What characteristic of the agents caused us to pick them to test? We didn't pick them. We let the brokerages pick which agents would be tested, though the brokers didn't know they were doing the picking. Whoever they had on the board to handle walk-ins, whoever was taking the phone calls, that was our agent. Then we made sure that the second tester saw that same agent. We did not have to do it that way. Under the law, brokers, you're expected to provide the same service to two customers, even if they see different agents. But we thought it would be a better test and more persuasive to see what would happen if the customers saw the same agent. So we gave you a break there, a break that the next test might not give. We did 86 of these tests, 86 pairs, at 12 companies, 12 brands. And we chose them because they were the largest in our area by number of listings. Together, those 12 represent more than half of the sellers in our market. They include familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as regional brands, Douglas Elliman and others that are big in New York area, but not nationwide. We didn't feel comfortable as journalists being the referees. So we had two fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One you met runs a fair housing program and had done tests for the US Department of Justice. And the other is the law professor from the University of Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of these referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. First, our team gave the agents and the brokers all the details, invited them in to watch the videos, gave them time to check their records so they could respond to our findings. And we put the videos and their responses online. So this was not a situation where you could say, oh, that was taken out of context. Will there be drive-by investigations? Quick 2-week tests done by local media? Yes, I know of TV stations and newspapers doing such tests. But this was not a drive-by investigation. This was a careful effort by a team that took more than 3 years. Now, the results. Let's just look first at who was treated differently. Asian American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, so 2 out of 10 on average. Latino American buyers were treated differently than whites 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And African American buyers were treated differently than whites 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers, and that makes sense in light of historic discrimination and current events. But I'd say let's not lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers or 2 out of 10 Asian buyers were being treated differently, and we're half a century down the road from passage of the civil rights laws, those seem like high numbers as well. We viewed this as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they performed. Out of 12 companies, only 2, and these were 2 of the smallest regional brands, were the only ones to pass all of their tests. So it's fair to say that most of the national and regional real estate companies in our area were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you no doubt have already asked yourself the most important question. Would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your communities. If this weekend, white and black and Latino and Asian buyers go shopping for homes in Middletown and Tom's River, if Christians and Muslims and Jews or couples with children and singles or couples without, if they're searching for homes with the same criteria given to the agents, on Monday morning in their email, will they be receiving the same listings? That's the test. Let's discuss what sort of differences we saw. First, we just saw different levels of service. Overall, our white testers got 50% more listings than their black counterparts. We saw differences in how buyers were screened. Some agents refused to help our black or Hispanic buyers unless they signed an exclusive contract. They said, that's the policy of our brokerage. But the same agent didn't require a contract for the white buyer. And we saw steering. A fair definition of steering is this: steering is influencing a person's housing choice based upon race, religion, or another of the protected classes. It can mean consciously or unconsciously providing information or opinions only about certain neighborhoods or certain school districts. For example, the agents in our test gave listings directing 1 out of 4 of our minority homebuyers, 1 out of 4, into different communities and different school districts altogether, no overlap with the areas they were giving to whites. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents, making comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime or resale values as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from living or looking in those areas. That's steering too, especially if the agent gives contrary information or leaves out that advice for the other buyer. We heard agents tell white buyers to avoid an area because of poor resale values, while encouraging minority buyers to look in the same area. It was fascinating. Minority buyers were not subjected to racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We're way past the days of signs that say whites only. But the white buyers heard the inappropriate comments about race and its proxies, schools, crime, and resale values. Here's a video clip that highlights the problem of inappropriate comments. Take just a second here. All right, here it comes.
American really came in, and they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
What is Freeport? Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. We need United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the
Bayshore has 2 school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word stealing, but I try to use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ?
Hey, Russ. Good. How are you? We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse,
It seems that some agents may have gotten a message through the years that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing, or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. One fear I have about the impact of our project is this: the comments made by the agents were so shocking, so far over the line, that they sort of get all the attention, right? I can't believe she said that. We may forget that these agents crossed the legal line when they gave different listings to different customers who had the same criteria, even without the illegal comments. Perhaps we need more attention to steering, to differential treatment, on what people do and not just what they say. And are agents giving the same advice to all clients? Do brokerages treat all clients equally?
Bill, you've been talking about steering. This is an important point, in my opinion, for agents to understand. Can you elaborate on how steering showed up in your tests?
Yes, Eileen, it's steering, sort of a vague catch-all term, sometimes used for many different kinds of behaviors. We've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it for a moment, neighborhood by neighborhood. Both of our testers would ask for an area, say, I need to be within half an hour of Northport. And that creates a circle, right, around Northport. That area, that circle, would include many communities and many school districts and schools. And they might vary in race or other attributes. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, listings would be given only to our white buyers. We all understand minorities are being steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for. Telling one person, there's no housing in an area in your price range. You wouldn't find anything for your money there. But there were listings, and showing those listings to another buyer who had the same price range. That's a form of steering. We also saw something else that we didn't expect. And I think this has not gotten enough attention in brokerages. We had minority communities inside the circle for both buyers where neither buyer got those listings. There are homes for sale in that price range. They're within the geographic area that both buyers asked for. But the agents didn't send those listings to either tester. These were the communities on Long Island with more than a modest amount of Black population. The agents ignored them, jumped right over them for everybody. That's steering too. Our legal expert said, well, who has the lawsuit in that case under the Fair Housing Act? It's a long list. Not only are the minority and white homebuyers being steered illegally. Catch that. Both the white and minority homebuyers are being harmed under the law by being steered around the minority areas. But also the communities are being harmed, the governments, and anyone who's trying to sell a home in those areas. And their listing brokers could have a lawsuit under the fair housing laws against the brokerages that are steering everybody around their communities. And you understand why. Fewer buyers means lower prices, lower home values, lower home equity, less money to send the grandkids to college. and less tax money for schools and parks and libraries. And you might say, oh, but the two testers were being treated equally. Even if you're treating customers equally with one another, that's not the only test. When I gave you the numbers earlier on results of our test, different results in 1939, 49% of the tests, those didn't include all the tests where the agents also broke the law by steering both buyers around the minority neighborhoods. That's still steering, and it's illegal. It harms not only both buyers, but also the sellers that you're steering customers away from. And under the law, you owe those sellers equal treatment as well. I suspect that it will take a few more years for this lesson to sink in. It probably will take a few high-profile lawsuits where sellers and their agents in overlooked neighborhoods are suing the brokers, steering around them, before brokers start to understand the hazards in the approach they're taking now. Now, here's a video clip with a simple, straightforward, classic example of steering. Directing buyers to areas that match the buyer's race. An agent tells one family, a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, that a community would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors, while the same agent warns another family, a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, warns them that the same community is a dangerous place. Let me play that for you. Okay, here it comes. You ready? I'm ready.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're nice people. When
we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Now, think about the point where that agent went astray. The text message about the gang activity, that gets our attention. That's the memorable part. But focus for a moment on the listings. Remember, both men were asking about an area that was centered on Brentwood. They asked for the same thing. She sent listings in Brentwood to the black family, but for the white family, she ignored Brentwood entirely. So we gave her an out. Even when the white buyer went on a home tour and said, hey, we printed out from online some listings in Brentwood, they're closer to where we're hunting, closer to the mother's nursing home that we need to be close to. She still didn't show those houses and sent the note about gang activity. The comment is a problem, but don't lose sight. Why didn't she give both families listings in the same area that they were asking for. Eileen, you're muted.
Sorry about that, Bill. My question to you is, do you think that the agents included in the documentary were knowingly steering, or that the same agents may believe their steering was unconscious or unintentional, that it wouldn't rise to the level of a violation? Will you address that, please?
Yes, Eileen, we did hear some agents whisper or say, I shouldn't be saying this, but I guess that's the real estate equivalent of buddy, hold my beer. Something bad is about to happen. But as you understand, the first point to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter if the bias is intentional or not. The Fair Housing Act, your state law, covers behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. It's the effect of your action, not your intent, that matters under the law. And this is not so surprising. We just did our taxes. Do you think the IRS will ask if you intended not to report your income? Conduct is what matters. If a real estate agent is treating one person differently than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent and the broker have violated the law. To remind you, those categories in the federal law are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, such as having children or expecting children. And state laws often add additional protected classes. In a licensed business like real estate, you're not allowed to let a bias, whether it's intentional or not, interfere with your legal obligation to provide equal professional services. Although practically intent doesn't matter, it is interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop someone from doing something, you have to consider why they're doing it. So let's talk a little bit about intentional or unintentional bias. Bias can be explicit, intentional, within our conscious. It can be implicit, happening faster than we're aware of it, an automatic brain process. And we're learning more about this kind of bias. Some scientists use the term unconscious bias to refer to it being automatic, and others prefer the term implicit bias because bias can emerge even when we're conscious of it. But by whatever name, people who want to be fair can still act in unfair ways. Studies show us over and over again that everyone has implicit bias. It's interesting that that sort of bias can lead our brain to treat people differently, lead to discrimination without our knowing it, and in ways that are not in sync with our values and ways that violate the law. We can treat people differently based on their identity, their appearance, their voice, their accent, their skin color, their hairstyle, even based on their name. There's one study where 20,000 emails were sent out to libraries and police departments and other government offices. Emails. Nobody was seeing the emailer, asking basic questions about hours, services. It's the same email, but the names of the senders were more commonly white or Black names. Government employees were 13% less likely to respond at all if the email came from Deshaun or Lakeisha or Malia, not from Claire or Jake or Abigail. Similar patterns show up in studies where identical job applications are submitted in different names. And names can signal not only color or nationality, but also status and education of a family. In real estate, that's one reason that in multiple offer situations, there's a good reason for the seller's agent to present the multiple offers to the seller with no names, just number of the offer and the relevant dollar amounts and terms and conditions. That protects the seller and the seller's agent from breaking the law or being accused of breaking the law. The seller shouldn't know which offer came from someone who's Asian or Jewish, who lives in the neighborhood or who doesn't. Here's two examples. Here's an example first from our study of real estate agents. We didn't flunk anybody for this. No one failed a test for this, but it is interesting. The agents in our tests were more likely to tell the buyer where the agent lived. More likely the agent to say, oh, I live in Northport. My kids went to the schools in Northport. More likely to say something like that, to divulge that information, if the buyer was white. Minority buyers were less likely to get any hint of where the agent lived. One of the agents offered babysitting help to our white buyer. You're looking in this area. Oh, I have a friend who could babysit for your kids. But our minority buyer had told the same agent that she had kids, and the agent didn't even mention that she lived in that area. That sounds like it could be implicit bias at work. And in a different context, in our study of traffic tickets, people got a hometown break. If you were stopped for a ticket, stopped for speeding in your town, you're more likely to get the warning. That sort of makes sense, right? You might be the mayor's brother-in-law. You might be, you're in a way the employer of the police officer. And that was true only for whites. Black drivers were more likely to get the ticket in the town that was the address on their license. What could be going on there? Now, again, we didn't flunk anybody for the babysitting test, but let's look at some more serious parts of the home buying process. It appears that some agents may be profiling, maybe that is assuming, consciously or not, that the person of color can't really afford homes in the price range they've stated or can't qualify for the mortgage and will be wasting their time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. This can lead to an agent being a gatekeeper for some buyers and a guide for others. One of the tricky things about profiling is how ineffective it is. Experts in law enforcement, people in various fields say that the real problem with profiling is not some political incorrectness. The real problem with profiling is that it leads them astray. It doesn't work. An example, let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays violent video games? Who dresses in a certain way? These are not good predictors, as any parent can tell you, of who might be a school shooter. Why? Well, the profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who's planning an attack. What's a better predictor? Stockpiling weapons, having grievances at school, telling other students of your plans, watch out, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Or think about airport safety. Religion of a passenger is not a good basis for thinking who might be a terrorist. Investigators would waste too much time on innocent people and not have enough time to look at people who, based on their conduct, should get more attention. Well, in real estate terms, you're in a commission business and you leave money on the table if you were to assume that some customers can't be good customers. But besides, maybe we didn't mention, steering is illegal. Now, why do it? Some agents might think that they'll make money faster with less effort if they sort of sort people, show people homes where you'll feel comfortable. You heard an agent say that. But think about it. Why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods or schools? Why even assume that the person sitting in your office or in that coffee shop with you isn't married to someone of a different race or religion? Besides, steering is illegal. Agents may think that a seller or the seller's neighbor, that's a potential customer, might not like it if they were bringing minority buyers into a wider area. Agents could fear that appraisers or lenders might be biased. Well, that would make it harder to close a sale. And there is a lot of evidence going back for decades and right up to this year of bias in appraisal and in lending. These subjects are getting a lot of attention. Large studies showing differences in appraisals in white and black neighborhoods that are not accounted for by the objective facts on the ground. It's getting attention from HUD and from industry groups. Meanwhile, the legal burden is on you to treat every customer fairly. So we're going to talk in a few minutes about some strategies for increasing the chances, some best practices. There's one final logical explanation, one other reason that it could be that some agents are steering. A few agents may be prejudiced, may be explicitly, intentionally biased. I just assume that that's not really the problem, not the common situation. There's just too much steering going on for it to be accounted for by only bad people doing it. Good people have to be doing it too.
Interesting, Bill. Can you tell me, please, what role do schools play in the action of agents?
Eileen, we heard agents over and over explain to our buyers, everything is by schools. Agents touted one district over another. That some were blue ribbon, others were declining. Often the same agent gave different information to different buyers. A bit of context on schools. America's schools and school districts are so segregated by race in many communities, they vary in composition from school to school. So that directing someone to a certain school district or school is the same as directing them to an area with higher or lower minority population, even if race isn't mentioned. It is a shock, but America's schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. And of course, school segregation and housing segregation are intertwined because we have school districts. Now, you may have heard agents say, oh, I can't talk about schools, can't answer any questions about schools. And the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Our legal advisors were very clear on this. Agents can answer factual questions about schools, can refer customers to websites with information, the State Department website, the Department of Education, or a school website in the local paper. The problem arises when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or making comments about school quality, supposed quality, or school test scores or demographics to steer some customers to or away from certain schools. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll hear from our law professor from the University of Kentucky, who writes the Fair Housing textbook, an advisor on our project. Let me play that for you. Okay, here we go.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, demand, because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86 paired tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying. or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is their race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
That agent writing down lists of schools helpfully sent the two testers from the real estate office back to our newspaper office with different lists. How do you discuss school quality without violating the Fair Housing Act and without doing harm in your community? The clear advice from NAR and our legal experts is to limit your information to answering factual questions. Maybe the parents are interested in football or the band program, and you know they won the district championship. You know the band played in the Macy's parade. And the second key part of that advice is to refer the buyers to factual information on school department websites, to encourage them to do their own homework, to be the source of the source, but to stay away from the trap of using or responding to labels such as good schools or nice schools. Here's a complicated part of that. As NAR keeps trying to tell its members, realtors are not experts in schools. I hope you're not offended by that. What they mean is that, well, first of all, different people want different things in a school. It's not one size fits all. Second, if you're judging what schools are best, what do you have to go on? You're probably using school test scores or one of those rating services that are based on school test scores, right? Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you, as educators know, how educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. In America, wealth and education of parents is a very good predictor, not perfect, but very good predictor of their children's test scores. Mother's education level is the best predictor. And race in America is a very good predictor of the family's education and wealth. So you see the problem. A so-called high-performing school may just be an area with better educated parents, passing the kids along. They came in as national merit scholars. Steering parents around schools with lower test scores perpetuates segregation by income and race. Now, there's been some recognition of this. For example, greatschools.org, which is used by Realtor.com and a lot of agents, has changed its ratings to focus more on student improvement, whether or not the scores rise in that district, but as kids move up. But even today, the main ingredients, main part of their recipe tells you more about the parents than it does about the schools. So you want a bottom line legally, our experts are clear. Yes, you can share ratings of schools. You can refer parents to websites that use them. I'm injecting a bit of caution into your thinking on test scores, partly because I think this is an area, it's clear, is going to get more attention. NAR says we're focusing more on the bad advice that's being given about schools. It's going to be doing more training in that area. And in a way, I want you to wrestle with the harder question. I guess it's a moral question. Is it right to steer buyers based on school test scores in a country as segregated as ours when it perpetuates segregation? It would be more public spirited, and it keeps you within the law, to explain to parents that they need to do their homework. I know many of you take that approach. It's okay to say to customers, there are fair housing laws that limit what advice any agent can give you on schools. And by the way, we have those laws for a good reason, because there's a long, ugly legacy of segregation. It's okay to educate parents. Did you know that school test scores mostly tell you how educated the parents are, not which schools are good? Well, no, they didn't know that. It's okay to tell parents, if schools are important to you, talk with other parents, chat with the principal, visit the school, go see the director of the program that you're most interested in. If they were buying a boat, if boats were important to them, they'd go look at boats.
I'm in agreement, Bill. What was the reaction from the real estate industry and government regarding this?
Well, I'll go through this quickly. I don't want to, it's first, we know that there's been some disciplinary hearings for the agents in New York. And so we'll see if anyone loses their license. They were all called to testify under oath. You can watch it online before a state Senate committee. The agent who said, watch the mothers waiting by the school bus, she said she just wanted her customers to know where the bus routes were. The brokers all said, we don't see anything wrong. Nobody did anything wrong at all. Their position seemed to be that if steering isn't announced, if you don't say, I'm now going to break the law and steer based on race, well, then it's not illegal. And we all know better. New York's legislature approved changes in state laws signed by the governor, testing of agents paid for by the real estate industry through surcharges on licenses. And those sorts of laws tend to creep from state to state. Nationally, NAR has responded vigorously. It has a new program called ACT. You can read about it online on the Fair Housing page from NAR. But to summarize, A for accountability, C for culture change, T for training. NAR says, there's a long legacy that we need to get over. There's government and industry working together to redline, to deny loans and insurance in certain areas, federal loans that were available only for white GIs coming back from the war, blockbusting racial covenants, subprime lending. And NAR says, today, fair housing is a core component of our code of ethics. But you may not be old enough like me to remember that there were 50 years when that same code of ethics prohibited selling a home in a white neighborhood to a person of color. NAR has made a public apology about this history and says, even if these practices all stopped today, their effects would live on for a long time. NAR has come out with, I think, a really nice new training tool that many of you have tried called Fairhaven. Yes. It's a game, a video game, a simulation. You're the broker, you're the buyer, you're trying to close a sale, and you can see opportunities for bias to creep in. It's about an hour to go through Fairhaven. It's at fairhaven.realtor. And I encourage you to have everyone in your office go through it. I want to mention 3 other steps quickly that NAR is taking. First, NAR is working with state associations, has examined the state laws on licensing and regulation to say, here are gaps. And that's really unusual. A national trade group looking for tougher recommending tougher regulation and enforcement in the states. Second, NAR is supporting those companies that want to try self-testing. And I think that might be the most important long-term change. And NAR has a new course, a 3-hour CE course on implicit bias. All of this, I think, seems useful.
Excellent, excellent. So based on your investigations, what do you think are the best ways to combat racism in real estate?
Well, stopping racism seems like a tough lift. So let's focus on reducing unequal treatment, especially steering. You know, our team of journalists would discuss, well, what if they stop steering? How hard would that be? You know, as an investigative reporter, the worst thing that can happen is that the company you're investigating will stop breaking the law before you can get your story published, right? No, but seriously, we wondered, well, could they just stop? Let's talk about some best practices, and I hope you've written down some. These are suggestions from NAR to ensure equal treatment. It seemed clear in our tests that many realtors were unfamiliar with minority neighborhoods. We're not aware of the new homes being built in Freeport. Just thought of Freeport as a Black school area. New homes being built by the water in Freeport they didn't know of. We also noticed that our large real estate brands had more than 200 branch offices on Long Island, but not a single office in the 8 communities where most of the Black residents lived. They didn't represent many sellers in those areas. What we saw in our tests made me wonder if brokers make an effort to know whether steering is happening in their offices. Brokers, do you check on which listings the agents give to customers? Do you know which neighborhoods or schools they're sending customers to, and what other areas matched up with the customer's actual criteria? I've had brokers say, I've been in this business 50 years. I've never seen any discrimination. And I'll say, that's great. Do you have any brokers who will say, oh, there's some areas where I just won't look? And they said, oh, yeah, sure. Well, think about where your office locations are. Think about where your agents represent sellers. Make a map of those and look at what is the characteristic of the area you're skipping over if there are holes in your map. Okay. Now, in our tests, you're all familiar with this. The agents would have a conversation with the buyers and then would turn to the computer screen and click to generate listings. If you think about it, that's the moment when steering is happening. And that means the records are in the computer. It means you could get your MLS to tell you which communities your agents are routinely skipping over or driving around. Notice that the actions here go far beyond posting a note on Facebook about Fair Housing Month or tacking up a poster. The most important changes might be to think about what's the process in our office. It's legal to require pre-approval from every customer. It's legal to require pre-approval from none. It's in between when the broker's license is at risk. Let me give our law professor, Bob Schwem from Kentucky, just a quick word on this topic. And he really steps up and takes a swing at it, but let's hear what he has to say. Here we go.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get 2 people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law that should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, I told you he really steps up to the plate. I want to share with you some specific suggestions from NAR about steps to take to ensure what I assume you all want to do. He's referring to if you don't want to obey the law. I trust that you all want to obey the law. but what are steps we can take to increase the chances that that happens? Let me share with you some slides, some quick suggestions here. Here you're seeing some of our testers. I see an IRS worker, a college professor, a nurse, a couple of actors. There are lots of out-of-work actors in New York. Now, here are some suggestions of best practices. Every customer should receive the same behavior from you. Show no more interest in one customer than another. If you're offering hospitality, a drink and a warm greeting, then offer it to everybody. At an open house, greet everyone with the same enthusiasm. Remember, you might be on camera. Follow up with every customer in the same way. Checklists have been shown in many fields about medicine, surgery, landing an airplane. Checklists help you do the same thing and not miss any steps. Make sure that everyone in your office provides the same information to all customers. Have the same procedure for everyone for assigning an agent to a specific customer, not based on the customer's appearance. Explain your services the same way to everyone. Obtain the same initial information from everyone. Tell everyone about your commitment to fair housing laws. Offer the same services to every buyer and every seller. Every buyer should leave the office with the same handouts. If you volunteer information or advice, volunteer it to everyone. And keep good records of these contacts with customers. Work out standard answers or scripts for your brokerage on difficult questions, such as which schools are good. Have a session where you pass the microphone around and practice answering that difficult question. Feel free to tell buyers that school test scores don't tell you which schools are good. Use templates that canned text for email and text to ensure that you provide everyone with the same information. Talk about the attributes of the property, not about the people in the neighborhood. Talk about the type of housing available, the market trends, not the populations. Provide complete and accurate information to everyone. And don't suggest to some buyers that they drive around the neighborhood or hang out by the school. Stick to factual information. The reputation of a community is not a fact. Safe schools is not a fact. Declining schools is not a fact. Refer customers to primary sources of information. Be the source of the source. If they ask about crime, refer them to the police department. If they ask about schools, urge them to visit schools or look at school report cards on a state website. Screen customers in the same way. If you require a buyer agreement, require it for everyone. If you ask one customer for ID, ask all. If you require pre-approval, require it for all. Referral to financing, offer it to everybody. Ask the same application questions for every renter. Give all potential buyers all of the listings that fit their objective criteria. If they have no requirements, they'll get every listing in your area. When they have more requirements, they'll start getting fewer listings. Allow the customer to make all the choices about the features of the housing, the price, the financing, the communities, the schools. Remember, you have an obligation not to discriminate against certain sellers or neighborhoods. When the customer says, oh, but now I need a corner lot, or I will be able to have a 3-car garage, well, they'll get fewer listings. Educate buyers about the law. It's okay to educate your sellers before they exert some pressure to discriminate against certain buyers. Explain that the same rules apply to every agent. And if an owner, if a seller or a landlord insists on making discriminatory choices, if they say, oh, no children or no vouchers, no Section 8, nobody of a certain race, you may have to tell them that they'll need to find another agent. You'll have to explain to them that they can't set arbitrary conditions that have a disparate impact, that cover up a discriminatory effect. I understand that you have a financial obligation to follow instructions, what the client wants, but that obligation stops when the instructions are not legal. Explain to buyers and sellers that you won't pass on love letters or pick-me letters. You can explain to them why. Those letters reveal all the protected classes you're in: race, religion, family status, nationality. And those letters are discouraged by NAR. And they tempt sellers and sellers' agents into committing a fair housing violation or being accused of one. Present offers with just the terms, not the names or characteristics of the buyers. And consider using a fair housing declaration. You can find this on NAR's website, Fair Housing Declaration, and a more detailed document that NAR has called the Equal Service Report, which is a way of keeping track of your contacts with customers, what they actually ask for. Brokers, it's a way to monitor compliance with the fair housing laws, the Equal Service Report. And it can help you overcome a legal claim under the fair housing laws, which are often not covered under your insurance for errors and omissions. All right. I just want to give you one closing thought. NAR makes this simple suggestion, 2 suggestions for not steering. And just think closely about these. They both seem like good suggestions, but they're contradictory. 1, give buyers all the listings that meet their objective criteria, right? We've talked about it. Give them everything that fits what they've asked for. And second, NAR suggests that we examine the agent, think about implicit bias. Think about, well, why did I exclude certain areas? You see the contradiction. If you're following the professor's advice, if you're giving them all, why don't you give them all the listings? Then why would you be excluding any areas at all? That's the only way that the broker whose license is on the line can be sure that an agent or 2 different agents are giving 2 customers the same listings. And that's the test. I appreciate your attention. I hope that you'll share our film from newsday.com/divided and stories that are there with your customers and your colleagues. Have a movie night. I discourage you from having a conversation about it. Well, who might be the racist in our office? I don't think that's very productive. I encourage you to have a conversation about how does it work in our office and how can we be sure that we're treating everybody equally. That's the test.
It's wonderful, Bill. Thank you so much. I know that we've got some questions, and I'm going to ask Lauren to moderate those so that she conveys them to you, and hopefully you can answer them quickly. Just before she does that, you and I were talking yesterday, and I made mention of the fact that, I've been in the business, over 35 years now, and that my awareness of this has changed very dramatically, and that my actions when I was first in the business, I would never consider doing them again, only because I thought that I was doing the right thing when in fact I was not. So we really do need to have a lot of good examination of how we're actually doing the business in light of what the laws say. So please, by all means, everyone, take that into heart. And I'm going to let Lauren go into the Q&A. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So Bill, one of the questions we have was, did you happen to have minority agents tested as well?
Yes, as we talked about in the discussion here, we tested minority agents as well. I'm going to give you my reaction to that question. I think sometimes, maybe not this questioner, but sometimes people ask this question because if discrimination were being done by minority agents, then it means that it's not discrimination. Sometimes I think that question is asked as a way to define out of existence a violation. Remember, it doesn't matter who's doing the violating. We found minority agents. You saw them in the videos there. A South Asian agent saying, you don't want to look there. It's a mini United Nations. That's just as wrong as if a white agent were saying that. And who they're saying it to doesn't matter. The violation of the Fair Housing Act has nothing to do with what the color of the agent is. And we shouldn't be surprised about this at this point. Think about a different context. Think about a trigger-happy police officer. It's very common now to see we see police officers of all races, white, minority, otherwise, involved in these well-publicized incidents. It's not, that's what people mean by systemic discrimination. They mean it's not one person making an act of hostility against people of a different race. It's the way the system works that might encourage employees, agents, officers of various backgrounds to treat people differently or to have stereotypes that they act on. I'm back to my example of traffic tickets, and then I'll stop about that. But, did you know that police officers are trained that if you're acting nervously when they pull you over, you're more likely to be a criminal? It's part of the training. You're more likely to be a drug courier. You're more likely to be a criminal if you're nervous. Well, a minority driver who's pulled over by a police officer of any race who's not acting nervously has not been paying attention to the news. That's what people mean by systemic discrimination. Something that appears neutral on its face, might sound like good training, but certainly will have a discriminatory effect.
Awesome. Was there any follow-up on any of the agents tested later? Yes, the agent who
warned one buyer about gang activity and not another recently won her case in New York that she's still practicing. She was allowed to keep her license. And the judge in the case criticized the state, real estate department for not doing an investigation. They brought in the stories, but they didn't bring in the testers to testify. They didn't bring in the listings that the two buyers had been given. They didn't do any investigating. And this judge said, I can't take your license away if the state won't even investigate. So we'll see if there's a better investigation in other cases. There were a couple of agents who gave up their license and not go through the disciplinary process. We did not view this as like the goal of the story was to get these individual agents to lose their license. It's okay with me if they're still practicing. Surely they've gotten a good bit of training. The point of our test was, is this common? How common is it? Is it hard to find this behavior? And it wasn't hard to find it at all.
I think that's really it. Someone did ask, how could I become a tester?
Well, fair housing agencies are always advertising for testers. You'll have a fair housing agency that works in your county, in Monmouth or Ocean or both, and that agency is always looking for, finding testers is really the hardest. We went to churches to do recruiting, and we used word of mouth. But in New York, we ended up using a lot of actors because they're available and they can they can stick to the script. We gave them a couple of days of training, and then we had the videos to monitor them. So we knew that they, if they went off script, if the two didn't ask for the same thing, we threw it out, started over with a new test. So, but actors were a useful group. But fair housing groups are always looking for people who can work flexible hours. We paid our testers, but some of the fair housing groups have them work as volunteers.
Awesome. I think we covered all the questions. If anything, we did record this session, so we will have this posted in a little bit. And we would love your guys' feedback as far as the attendees, to give some testimonials, for example, as far as what you learned, feedback for Bill. And thank you again, Bill, for everything. This is very insightful.
Lauren, Eileen, thank you. Thank you all. You've been very kind. I
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
And with that, I hope everyone has a great day. And thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.